We're coming to you live from the historic Gay Street Theater in historic downtown Little Washington, Virginia. And I want to thank Dick and Nancy Rains for sharing the facility with us as they have so many times for RAC and for other community organizations. We'll start off with Kevin Adams. Kevin is an award-winning oil painter living and working in Washington, Virginia. He was named Artist in Residence for Shenandoah National Park in 2017. He was an officer and combat artist in the US Marine Corps. His works have been commissioned for several US embassies and by the US Department of the Interior for the Grand Canyon and Glacier National Parks. He's also represented in numerous private collections. Kevin is represented in Little Washington by the Gay Street Gallery and also by the Julie Heller Galleries in Provincetown, Massachusetts. He's twice had shows in New York City and has participated in solo and juried group exhibitions around the country. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, John. Thank you.
You bet. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Kevin, let's start by asking, how do you decide what to paint? How do you select your subjects?
Well, seeing these paintings in the show, I remember when I saw it, when I saw the view or the barn, that landscape. And I remember needing to stop and try to understand what caught my eye. And that's normally what I try to hold on to. But it's more than just a moment. I try to hopefully capture the feeling of the surroundings and the circumstances. And then when I do understand what has caught my eye, you know, that's what I try to build upon. So what caught my eye is a sentence, and hopefully my painting is a short story. I still find painting difficult, but the challenge of editing and deciding what's essential for my little story. But I don't necessarily try to put everything in the painting because I really want the viewer to have an opportunity to be drawn in and to finish the painting themselves.
When you talk about something catching your eye, is what catches your eye typically color or composition or subject matter or some combination of all of the above?
Normally, it's more, I think it must be the relationship between colors or a quality of light, or how the quality of light is affecting my understanding of the colors that I'm seeing. So it can be a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. I love how light wraps around, how light hits an object and helps you to understand that it's 3-dimensional. And then that's what I try to put on a canvas. You know, I try to trick the eye and feeling as if I've put that barn, put that tree, that mountain, you know, into the scene.
Great. Do you ever work on location, or do you just work in the studio?
I love working on location whenever possible. I'm not necessarily trying to do finished work on location, but I hope that I'm catching some of the right color notes, the shapes, and hopefully in the process, I can start noodling through and trying to decide what's essential and start developing an idea for the composition. One study on location can end up being the inspiration for many paintings. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for one painting.
Are the studies that you make on location, are they full scale, or are they Smaller?
No, most of the time they are small, 8 by 10, 9 by 12 inches, just because the light is changing so quickly that it's interesting. I love working on location because you really feel pushed. And as that light changes, it really helps you to understand what color it was. And so you don't have a lot of time. And so I'm really trying to just understand and capture some of those true colors, those moments of color. And then hopefully that's my sort of library of information that I take back to the studio and work from.
And what other artists have influenced you and your work over the years?
I think Edward Hopper would be my biggest hero. I think his compositions, his palette, his ability to convey different qualities of light in his painting. He's my first hero. I think Giorgio Morandi is just a true inspiration. He spent his entire life doing almost nothing but still life paintings, a few landscapes, and they are just so rich. You know, if I ever do one painting half as strong as one of his, I will have accomplished all that I can hope for.
That's nice. And that choice of Hopper and Morandi also accounts for some of the quietness that's so evocative in your work.
I very, very seldom put people or animals in my painting. On occasion, I've thrown the suggestion of some cows in the field, but only for visual weight to sort of help balance out the composition and to give interest to that part of the painting.
Finally, what is it that you hope the viewer will take away after seeing your work?
I hope that when someone is looking at my work, that they feel aware that they're looking at someone seeing. I want my work to come across as being honest, and I want them to notice, hopefully, how aware I am of the different parts that make up the composition, and maybe add to their level of knowing about Virginia or wherever I am painting. I try to take something that is, you know, at a glance ordinary, and I try to work towards something that is absorbing.
Well, that's wonderful, Kevin. Thank you so much for being with us, and thanks for sharing your thoughts about your work.
Thank you, John. It's my pleasure. I thank you.
Next up is Ruthie Windsor Mann. Ruthie works primarily in oils, watercolor, and pen and ink. She's received many individual awards in juried exhibitions throughout the United States and has participated in numerous one-woman and group shows. She was a guest artist at the 1982 World's Fair. Before moving to Rappahannock County, Virginia, her favorite subjects to paint were European buildings. More recently, she has become enamored of the nature surrounding her studio in the middle of a hayfield. She's inspired to paint anything if the light is intriguing. Ruthie, how long have you been an artist, and how did you become an artist? Was there a particular person, event, dream, or accident that led you into the arts?
Well, I've been doing this. This will be my 50th year. So I started in 1970 when I graduated from college. And my mother was an artist, but I was, just too busy playing in the neighborhood to pay much attention to it. Yesterday, I was reminded somebody was hunting an artist in Knoxville. And they asked if I knew them. And I said, well, they didn't say the name. And I said, well, I've been gone for so long. I left Knoxville in 1987. I said, I've been gone so long, I wouldn't know them unless they were dead. And she said, well, I think she is dead. And I looked at the dates, and it was 1881 to 1963. I saw the name, and I said, yes, I took from her. And I said, I was in elementary school. My mother took from her. And I think the woman must have said, oh, she said, I want to teach a children's class. Well, my mother was not pushy about me painting or anything, and I'd shown no inclination toward it. And so my mother dragged me in the car, drove me across town to some real dark house with this really old woman. And it was like on Saturday afternoon. Well, I hated it. I could not abide it. She probably put an apple on the table and said, draw it. And I think I was in there with one other person. I had no clue who they were. So I really think that probably turned me away from art. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school and took a trip to New York to see the Frick. I happened to take a class at what became the Knoxville Museum of Art. At the time, it was the Doolin Gallery of Art. And I thought, and I had another experience with somebody who was painting my portrait. And we talked, it was like an art summer. And I really became immersed. And I thought, I could do this if I wanted. But I didn't want to teach art. I have absolutely no desire to do that, never have. And I thought I didn't want to major in it because I knew I couldn't sit in a classroom for 2 hours. The 1 hour of history was a lot easier than 2 hours of sitting, I guess, doing art. So it really wasn't until, even though I took a class here and there, it wasn't until really my last year in college that I started doing it. And that summer, I had a little show and everything sold. And I thought, oh, this is pretty easy. And so I still chugged along, so worked, but I wasn't inspired until about 6 years later. And I was getting ready for a show, and I realized I was really devoted to it. And where I was getting up at 5 a.m. and painting all weekend. I wasn't getting out over the weekend, and I was painting all weekend. And then I had to go, I was teaching school at the time, but not art. And I would, just paint totally. And I thought, okay, this is it. I turned the corner. And the whole thing was a bit like Jonah in the Bible. It was like, I kind of knew it was my calling, but I kept saying, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And I ended up just totally giving myself over to it. And I'm completely devoted. And I have been I've been doing it for 50 years, but I've been devoted for 46. Or is that right? No, 44. I can't add either. So.
Well, how has your work changed over the 50 years that you've been an artist? You started out in Europe painting buildings, and now you're doing something very different. So how would you account for that transition?
Well, I think I've just, I've aged for one, but I still love pen and ink work. And so I would do this little pen and ink and watercolors of European buildings. And so I was doing that and having a great time doing it, but I couldn't get large. I didn't have the confidence to, paint in a large manner. You can see that one right there is a 4 feet by 4 feet. So I have kind of changed in that respect. But I did that, painted the European buildings, and I painted, I don't even know how many buildings people would have me do. I did a lot of commission work. I don't do commission work anymore, but I did a lot of that. And if you paint something, somebody wants you to paint, it's a bit like painting a portrait. Like they want it to look like the person, but they want it to look better than the person. So when you're painting someone's building, their house or something like that, you have to flatter it, but it still has to look like that. And I'm now doing exactly what I want to do, how I want to do it, what I take. I may see something outside and I want to paint it. it may end up looking not one thing like what I'm looking at. It's more the feeling that comes across. It's more of an expression of how I feel. And those flowers right there, they don't, I mean, I just made up those flowers, you know, and juggled colors around. Oh, it needs a little here, this here, but it is almost like a stream of consciousness thing with me. It's just, I let go, let free. I don't want to do it. Used to be, it would look more like a photograph. I don't do that now. I mean, I might start out like that. And then I realize it doesn't have the life I want in it. Then I get that palette knife in my hand and I go wild and do whatever I want to do. It may look like something else. There's another painting in here. Or I think it's almost spring. I almost had it where it was totally representational. Then this one right here. And then I just got that palette knife and I just let it be the semblance of spring as opposed to exactly the way each leaf on the tree would look. It's just that lacy quality that I was trying to do. But some of it, it's not even a conscious thought. I just go at it, let it flow. And that's what I love to do now. If I had to do the same thing over and over, each painting is a little different because I want to just spill my guts onto the canvas. I want the drama to be on the canvas. I don't want drama in my life, but I want it on that canvas. And I want people to have a feeling and feel intensely. I don't want them to talk about the painting. I want them to feel about the painting. That sounds a little esoteric, but that's the way I am. You know, that's the way I feel now.
You talk about the art flowing. Do you ever have any dry spells when the art isn't flowing? And how do you get out of those situations?
Well, I take a break, and if which is frequent, I take far more breaks than I'm probably painting. But a lot of times I sit on my sofa over in the studio and I'm just looking. I may be playing a computer game, and then all of a sudden I'll catch my eye on something. I say, okay, that's it, da 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 da, and then I'll go change it. Sometimes I'll take a break for a week. Sometimes I'll take it 2 and 3 days. I just need I need to recharge. And I totally need to recharge. So, you know, and then sometimes I have to let the painting dry. I work on several at one time. Sometimes I don't. And if I'm all into one painting, I might let it sit for a while till it dries, and then I go back in, and that's when I will take a break. And as you know, we don't have a grocery store in the county, so that may be when I go grocery shopping or, you know, run the errands I need to do. So, anyway, that's kind of, it's more now, I'm just kind of living the dream as opposed to, you know, trying to paint what I see.
Yeah, wonderful, Ruthie. Well, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your work with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Linda Croxon. She's an abstract artist who works in oils on prepared board. She works from her studio in Hat Brim House in Slate Mills. Welcome, Linda. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
How do you start a painting? Do you see the image in your mind, or does the composition develop as you paint?
Well, I start most of my paintings from a drawing, a sketch of a landscape or a portrait or a still life. I do this, I choose something exterior to myself, because from then on, I try to use intuition and a deep impulse to react to what I started with and to make these movements on a canvas. Once I've started, then I work as long as I can on this, in this creative, this intuitive mode. Then you sit back and look at what you've got, use the judgmental, critical aspects of mine to see, well, am I getting anywhere with this? Does this look like something I want to proceed with or not? Then it's back to trying to allow this intuitive part of the mind to take over again and tell you the next step. One of the reasons that I use these ampersand boards, as I think all of these paintings are on, is because when I get into the critical stage, I think, uh-oh, this isn't going to work. And I may scrape it out, or I may even get out terps or medium and dissolve part and rub it off so that I can continue to, I hope, take a step forward in the whole business.
You talk about the intuitive versus the critical stage. I understand what the critical stage is, the evaluation of how it's going. But what do you mean by intuition?
Well, I'm using intuition just as a shorthand, because it's a complicated idea, and I'm not sure, you know, I've got it in a way that I can explain it very clearly. But what I think we're talking about is that part of our minds, everyone's mind, that is pre-language. It is ancient and deep and creative and very fertile. And for me, that's where true creativity originates from. But it's not a thing that you can just turn on and off like a tap. You have to sort of, well, I'm sure everyone has a different way of doing it, but for me, I've got to relax, be patient, be open, and have an open heart and open mind, and allow these impulses to arise. So all of that is what I'm meaning when I use the word intuition.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. A sort of pre-verbal state of mind, almost a kind of neurological process.
I don't know about neurology.
That's interesting. How do you know when a painting is finished then? You go through the intuitive and the critical stages. When do you hit the finish line?
The finish, yeah, that's hard sometimes. There are times when I begin to feel comfortable with a painting, you know, fairly early, maybe only after 3 or 4 weeks. But other times there's a great deal of doubt. And sometimes it goes on so long that I have to pack up the painting, put it away, and wait a year or so. And then the key is to pull it out and get a glimpse of it before you're ready, so that it's as if you've never seen it before. And that is when I feel like I can really judge these things and know, that's okay. Basically, all I'm looking for in myself is just the feeling that this is okay. I'm comfortable with this. I don't mind other people seeing this thing. That's when I feel like it's done. I've achieved my goal. And
what's your aim with your paintings? I mean, what do you wish the viewer would take?
Yeah, I hope my aim is it's just to make something that's new, that's honest, that's clear and steady, and that will repay open-minded contemplation.
And why does it need to be abstract?
Well, it's been my experience over many years that people look at an image, the narrative in their mind immediately clicks in, and they begin to think, oh, that's like Aunt Sally's barn, or that picture looks like a Matisse, or what a beautiful rose, or whatever. But as soon as that happens, they have stopped interacting with the painting. They have checked it out, they know what it's about, and they're ready to move on. And I would like, by removing the image, I would like to encourage people to actually stand before the work with an open, relaxed mind and interact with the thing that is in front of them. That's it, simple as that.
That direct experience of the work itself, not mediated through subject matter or narrative or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah. Because as someone who depends on her eyes, I realize that most people don't actually use their eyes very well, but they could if they just put their, hearts in it. And so I guess I'm sort of hoping that some of this encourages people in that way.
Wonderful, Linda. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
thanks for the insights into your work. That's really interesting.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Not on the camera. Matthew.
Next up is Philip Ward, who was born in Yorkshire in the northeast of England, as he says, a long time ago. He graduated from Canterbury College of Art in 1973 and has painted ever since. He's been painting in Virginia since 1982 and in Rappahannock since 2007. Philip paints from his studio, Hat Brim House, in Slate Mills since 2016. Welcome, Philip. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Very pleased to be here.
Philip, how do you decide what to paint, and how do you begin a painting?
Well, I paint abstract paintings, but I don't make anything up. All my paintings come from the world around me, so I'm constantly collecting still moments that I see while I'm on the move, and I make little diagrams with color notations of these things. It could be just a reflection in a shop window, or a puddle, or a view in a rear view mirror, a little glimpse across the street, or it could be simple as a cardinal in a blooming dogwood tree. That's enough for me to get a little diagram, a little notation of where I was and what I saw. And then back in the studio, I do the color version of that, following the little written notations, and I do them all the time. This morning I was working on number 132 from this year, for example. So after a while, one of those I decide is quite visually compelling, and I may proceed further with it, or two or three others interact with each other, and that can give me a start. And then I get a notion about this. It's like making up your own rules for Monopoly or something. I've got a notion, I've got the rules, and I set out on that path. The important thing is, I don't know where it's going to end up, because I think it's important for me to paint what I don't know rather than what I know, in order that I can learn something as I go along.
Well, if you're inspired by things you see out in the world, does that mean you work on location sometimes, or do you, or just in the studio?
No, I collect everything out in the world, but all my work is done in the studio. These paintings in the current show are all 4 or 5 feet by 5 or 6 feet, so that would be impractical outside, and I don't need to do that in any case. I work horizontally, and I work from all 4 sides, even though the paintings always have what to me is a distinctive top and a bottom. I work at them from all 4 sides in a horizontal manner. And what you're doing, because I've removed illusionism and narrative and depiction and nostalgia, you're left with I'm organizing color, I'm manipulating color. Any painting is merely an arrangement, a precise arrangement of color on a flat 2-dimensional plane. And what you have to do is make a coherent image with that. And that relies on the color. And so as soon as you've got 1 or 2 areas of color down, you have to keep modifying them as you add more things, because what's important is not the individual colors, it's the relationships between the colors that you're going for. So I go down that path that I started on, and there are diversions and cul-de-sacs, and you go around in a circle, and there are red herrings along the way. But after a while, I've done something, it's dry, I set it up vertically and look at it and decide what can stay and what has to go. And gradually over a period of time, I end up with what I feel is a colored, coherent, spatial image.
Interesting, because the color is clearly very important. Do you have a sense of what colors work together? I mean, do you have a particular color theory, or is it, as Linda says, an intuitive process?
Well, it's intuitive and based on experience, but there is no theory with it. It's all empirical and pragmatic. You have to judge it. You can't ever predict that this color is going to do that, because in one circumstances it will, and in the next 19 circumstances it will be different. So the main thing is to be visual and pragmatic and judge it on what you see. There's nothing else to rely on. It's a little bit like wrestling with an angel, because you've got something that does not exist, but could perhaps be marvelous, and you have to wrestle it into existence, almost in spite of yourself, not because of yourself.
Interesting. So what drew you to abstraction in the first place? Have you always been an abstract painter?
No, I happen to have a very great facility for drawing, and I did a lot of it from as a child and on through school and everything, and that was great, except by the time I was in my second year at art college, I realized that all I was doing was exhibiting my facility. I was no longer learning anything. And that's why I realized I painted myself into abstraction, in fact, by removing the narrative, the illusionism, the depiction, all of that. So you're just left with paint, which is color. And you have to arrange it, as I say, still in a coherent way. You can't just put something down and say, okay, I did that, because again, that to me is not a learning experience. You need to work with the material and see where it will take you.
Wonderful. The paintings are so rewarding in terms of the color and the composition. So they're a real chromatic feast.
Well,
Philip, thank you so much. It's wonderful to have you with us, and wonderful to get a better sense of how you approach your work.
It was my entire pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Ron Paris, but Ron couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to read you something he wrote about his work. Ron grew up surrounded by photography. His father, a television writer and a news anchor who worked for NBC, loved photography and filmmaking and taught Ron how to develop and print images when he was 5. Ron later studied photography at the Maryland Institute College of Art and the Rhode Island School of Design. After graduating, he worked as a fashion photographer in New York before starting his own multimedia and video production company, which he ran for over 30 years. And like his father, he also worked in television writing. Ron's simmering passion for photography was rekindled in the early 2000s, and he eventually became a full-time artist. Working in both black and white and color, he explores the magic and splendor of nature, but also the beauty and the absurdities of human nature. His work pierces the surface of what we see and exposes what we are missing. The works in the exhibition are all part of a series called Coalescence, which is a work in progress. There are currently about 40 images in the series, and of which 6 are in this show. The title Coalescence refers to elements coming together to form something new. As I said, Ron couldn't be here today, so he sent in this statement, which I will now read. I began work on this series during a visit to South Carolina in late spring of 2019. I was fascinated by the Low Country, the textures, the foliage, the smells, the colors, the wildlife, and the rich history. I did a great deal of photography while down there and was happy with the images that I was getting. One morning, I was photographing around a humid and misty bog. There was foliage I'd never seen, sounds I'd never heard, scents I'd never smelled, and a few alligators watching me closely. The atmosphere was abstract and difficult to describe. I realized that this kaleidoscope of intersecting sensations I was feeling could never be fully captured with the camera. I considered trying to paint the scene. Of course, I had no canvas or paints available, but the idea of using paints stuck with me. When I returned home, I looked at the photographs I had shot and was pleased with them. But I decided I'd also try that idea of using paint on canvas to capture from memory what I experienced in that bog. I envisioned perhaps doing a show with both a photographic perspective and a painted one. I hadn't painted in many years, so the thought intrigued me. The paintings I did captured something very different from the photographs. While the idea of showing both versions together was interesting, I remembered a bit of John Lennon's studio recording lore. The Beatles recorded many versions of Strawberry Fields Forever. And there were two versions that Lennon particularly liked. One was acoustic and one was electric. Lennon couldn't decide which version was best, so he asked his producer, George Martin, to combine the two. Martin explained that it would be difficult since both were recorded in different keys and different tempos. Lennon looked at him and said, quote, "You'll figure it out, George," end quote, and then promptly left. Of course, Martin's merging of those two versions created one of the most groundbreaking songs ever recorded. So with that in mind, and on a much smaller scale, I decided to optically merge photograph with painting, fusing the two different elements in order to create something that is both real and abstract. And that's what led to the creation of the Coalescence series. Thanks for the inspiration, John Lennon. And just a footnote to that, Ron explained that he digitally merged the painted image and the photographic image. So he created a digital version of the painting, which he then superimposed on the photograph. So you're seeing the technical coalescence as well as the coalescence of images. Finally, we come to an unusual collaborative team, an unusual collaborative contribution to the exhibition that features two artists, Jen Cable and Kat Habib. Jen Cable creates her floral works and living green art installations from her studio, Flourish Root, which is also home to ceramic artist Kat Habib. Working together, Jen and Kat create art inspired by their surroundings, by nature and the seasons. Kat's hand-built sculptural ceramics meld perfectly with Jen's artistic florals, which use flowers, foliage, and natural materials to create living green works evocative of the seasons and natural surroundings. And they teamed up to create these collaborative works for the exhibition, where Jen used Kat's ceramics as containers for her floral compositions, and then the works were photographed, which is what we're looking at in the exhibition. First, questions for Kat. I've known you since you were a child, and I'm surprised and delighted you've become an artist. So I'm wondering, how long have you been an artist, and how did you become an artist? Was there a particular person or event that inspired you to be an artist?
I think I've always been an artist with hindsight, but I didn't define myself as that for a long time. I grew up on a farm without other children around, so I was always making things as part of entertaining myself. And I was very lucky in that my parents supported those efforts, and I went to schools that had phenomenal art programs, and I took all the classes I could. In high school, I started playing with clay more seriously, and I was introduced there, although I thought of myself as a painter. But like Ruthie, I ran away from the definition of an artist, and I think it was because the idea of a starving artist was the strongest thing that I could think of. And I thought I would pursue art conservation instead. So I went to liberal arts schools and majored in art, and ended up being one of the few people there that was really serious about making in those programs. But you know, I took lots of fascinating classes, so I'm glad I did that kind of broad educational base. But it wasn't until I had been in school for several years and rather frustrated and not quite sure what direction I wanted to go into, that I had a friend who was an artist that had gone to school for illustration and was working in the field, who said to me, you know, you should do this, and you should go to art school, and I will shoot your portfolio. And it was, you know, this kind of 6-week period of taking photos, applying to school, getting in, and then starting, and realizing, oh, these are my people, that really made it click of, oh, I am an artist, and this is who I'm meant to be. And it, you know, in hindsight, it's been since I was little, but I probably didn't know that until I was in my early 20s, that that's the title that was right for me.
And did you gravitate to ceramics right away in art school, or?
I didn't. Actually, I was a painter. I went to the Corcoran College of Art and Design in DC, which is an incredibly conceptual program. And so it was basically solve a problem with any medium you can imagine. And I always took clay classes as sort of an escape from the high stress core classes. And it was finally in my final year in there that my teacher said to me, "You're doing beautiful work in clay, and I think that would actually be better answers to what you're trying to talk about. Why don't you pursue ceramics as your primary medium?" And that was the permission I needed to really hold on to it and seize it. And then when I graduated, I was offered an assistantship there in the ceramic studio, and then ended up managing the ceramic studio for the college for several years. And it was in that period that it was like, okay, this is who I am. I'm a sculptor, and clay really has my heart.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what we're looking at technically. I gather they're hand-built, but what kind of clay is it, and how's it fired, and how do you achieve the color effects and so forth?
Okay. These are all hand-built, and what that means is I don't throw on the pottery wheel at all. It's largely coils, so kind of like rolling snakes and then blending them together, or some slabs. And then I'm a wood fire potter. These have all been fired in 2 Japanese-style Anagama wood kilns. I'm using stoneware. I'm using the same clay body for all of the pieces that are represented here. But the coloration differences you're seeing have to do with the duration of the firing and the wood used. The ash is a very different color. So the 2 pieces that you can see clearly on the screen right now are from the same kiln, and they have a very like warm color palette with more brown, and that's from a 7-day firing. And then the other pieces that have kind of a cooler color palette, more grays and purples, that's from a 3-day firing. And the wood is different. But I don't use glaze at all. So all the coloration that you're seeing comes from the time, temperature, and wood ash combining with the clay.
Uh-huh. And so there's a 3-day firing and a 7-day firing. Do those achieve different effects? Or is it different heat levels, or?
We're firing to approximately the same temperature, but you'll notice looking at the warmer tones, the browner pots, they are shinier, and their ash is drippier, and that's the 7-day firing. And it's a longer time for the ash to land on the surface and to melt. So you're seeing that difference. And then the cooler temperatures is more of a matte surface, and that's a shorter firing. And it also has to do with hanging at certain temperatures for certain periods of time. It's a really highly technical, scientific way of firing that's also very intuitive. A lot of it is just listening and watching the flames to get a sense of what comes next.
And do different woods burn at different temperatures? Does that change the effect?
It's not so much having to do with temperatures as the wood ash itself and how the wood ash melts. So, you know, we fire to about 2350, so very hot on both kilns, but using softwood, so more pine, which is the brown pots, is more melty, and then we're using green hardwood, so largely freshly cut oak on the cool colored pots, more matte. So that's what you're seeing in the difference there. But either way, wood will burn very hot.
And so it sounds like a lot of trial and error.
It is, yeah. I really feel like the kiln and the fire is my collaborator.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And can you get the clay to take pretty much any shape, or does the coiling have some inherent limitations in terms of shape and size and so forth?
I think the limitations come more from the firing. As you might imagine, holding anything at that high of temperature for that length of time is a huge amount of stress on the object. So I can build almost anything, but the question is, will it survive the firing? And the answer is no. So gravity definitely becomes a factor when you're thinking about that amount of temperature.
Right. Also a lot of trial and error, I guess.
Yeah, I have about a 50% loss rate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Kat, thank you so much for sharing with us. It's really fascinating to get a sense of how, not just what you do, but how you do it.
Thank you.
Jen, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
So where do you get your materials? You've got the most unusual selection of plants, and I'm wondering how you find them and where.
Well, we grow a lot at our studio gardens. I'm very lucky that I have friends and clients that share great stuff. And then also when I'm out and about, if I see something, I usually try to find it and get back to it. And so all over, I like to really focus on what's right around us. That's very inspirational to me, the seasons, what we're surrounded with. So it tends to be in a radius that's no more than 5 to 6 miles. It's all right around me, and even closer, as close as I can get it. So
the selection of materials sounds very seasonal then, what
Yes.
you can grow at a given time.
Yes, absolutely,
So
absolutely.
what do you do in the winter?
So it's a lot of things that are structural. I like to leave a lot in the garden. I don't like to clean up the garden. I like to leave it as is and let it see how it breaks down. And because I tend to look at things in layers and textures. And so when I'm looking at the gardens as they break down, it changes every day. And I feel like that translates into my work and what I do and how you see the things that I put together.
So in the winter, do you use a lot of dried flowers, seed heads, pods?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And evergreens in there too, you know, but sure. And I also collect things that tend to dry in the garden in the fall or have an interesting look to them. And I tend to hold on to them because in my mind's eye, I see it going somewhere in my work. So I like to make sure that I keep it in the studio and you know, I'm able to use it later.
And I also noticed that you use mosses and things that will last through the winter.
Yeah, I'm a moss person. I tend to gravitate towards moss when I'm hiking or walking, and I've been known to take a really long time to walk just a few feet because I'm looking at the moss because I'm pretty obsessed with it.
So what's your typical workday like? You talk about hiking, you talk about growing your own flowers. I mean, what part of your day is devoted to actually composing?
Right now we're expanding the gardens a lot at the studio. So we're planting a lot, watering a lot. But also, you know, when we're out and about, we're, you know, cutting and gathering and harvesting. So that's usually morning or as I said, if I spot something, you know, I'll grab it the day before, hold on to it. Because my work is ethereal, it's very spontaneous. You know, it's very quick. It's always happening. It's not very stagnant. You know, it's always going on. So the days are pretty fast paced.
Yeah.
and it's always go. It's kind of an ongoing process constantly. So
do you actually put the compositions together when you've got a commission, or do you keep a lot of
No, I like to have everything be as fresh and as new as it can be. I mean, you'll have somebody that wants me to do a design or composition for them or work, and I like to go out and see what's in the landscape and what's surrounding me. I don't want to be tied down to something. It's as I said, once again, I'll go to that word spontaneous, you know, because something that was there 10 hours ago might not be there, or it might have completely changed. You know, whether it be the bloom or whether it be the die off or whether it be a pod that's, you know, all sorts of things. It's just like nature, you know, it's always changing, ever changing, which I love that. That's one of my favorite things about what I do, is you never know what you're going to get.
Well, you're the only artist in this exhibition who deals with ephemeral things. And
Yes.
is that, you make it sound like that's appealing to you, that
it is, you know, I used to kind of fight that a little bit and ephemeral and think, wow, how am I going to get this translated, or how's it going to stay? But I don't so much anymore, because look at everything, look at our environment and the nature that's around us. I mean, everything's ephemeral and it's all fading or changing or growing. I actually love it now. It's kind of a release, and it's freeing, because, you know, when I put something together, as I said, I mentioned textures and layers, and I think of it as levels too. You know, it's going to be this whole thing, and then little by little it changes, and so you'll have something that looks completely different at the end. And to me, that's great. You know, that's the nature of things, and that's, you know, I love that part. And as I said, it's not as troublesome as you would think it'd be. As I said, I find it very freeing.
well, that's wonderful. And has your work changed over time or remained sort of consistent?
No, it's definitely changed. I feel, you know, I have a background. I used to do garden and landscape design work, and I have so it had a very kind of systematic design approach of how I did things and put things together. And it's still free flowing in the way I designed gardens, but I felt it was, you know, that it has a formula, and I translated that into flowers when I first started. And but now, as I've gone through this, and as we just talked about, you know, where I thought ephemeral would be a bad thing, it's not. It's a great thing. It's very freeing. So I just kind of go with the flow of it, and I have a much more organic, natural flow with my designs as time has gone on, and as I put more things into the garden and find more things. You know, I'm always find something new every year, and that's every season, I should say. That's great, because flowers that were blooming a certain way last year, they aren't going to be this year. And same with foliage. I mean, everything's different. So that lens, and that translates into my work, where, as I said, it's become much more organic and free flowing as I've gone on through this process.
Wonderful, thank you. A final question for Jen and Kat together or individually. How did you come up with this idea of a collaborative contribution to the exhibition?
We work together frequently.
Yeah.
I mean, my work is always at Flourish Root, and I do make some work, and we've done some workshops there together, both making vases for flowers. And then we also do flowers together if we take on event clients. And so I have found that in working with flowers, it has impacted my ceramic work. If I end up making forms that I think would be really nice to work with. And so it's like in having the flowers and my pots in the same space, but then also having the flower work impact some of what I'm making. It's become a really kind of natural collaboration to go beyond just working together for events, but to also pair my work with Jen's flowers.
Yeah, and I would add that, you know, if it doesn't sound, you know, my flowers always seem to feel much more at home in Kat's vessels, because they seem, and my work, her work is so natural, and so the forms, the colors, everything, it's an environment that they work amazingly well together, and we do too. So we're very lucky.
So it's an ongoing collaboration. And
yes,
this is
absolutely. All the time.
One episode in a past and future collaboration.
Yes. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, and thank you to all of the artists. This brings us to the conclusion of this particular interview session. A reminder to those of you watching this that you can visit this exhibition anytime at your leisure. You can move around the exhibition spaces and zoom in on particular works that interest you. And you'll see that contact information and detailed information about each work is available in the exhibition space. This is also the first of several such exhibitions that we'll do. So stay tuned for future exhibitions. In the meantime, thank you to all our artists, and in the words of Garrison Keillor, be well, do good work, and keep in touch. Thank you so much to all of you.